glad you came back to continue our book today. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. And today we are on chapter 6, and it's called Mr. Toad. Oh, now we get to find out more about what Mr. Toad's been up to. It was a bright summer morning. The river was flowing, and the hot sun seemed to be pulling everything green from the ground, as if by strings. Mole and Rat had been up since dawn, polishing, painting, and repairing their boats. They had just finished eating breakfast when they heard a heavy knock at the door. "Mole, be a good chap and see who is at the door," Rat said. Mole went to the door and came back with Badger. It was a great honor for Badger to make a call to their house. "My friends, the time has come," Badger announced solemnly. "Time for what?" Rat asked. "Time for whom, you should say," explained Badger. "It is Toad's hour." "Hooray!" exclaimed Mole. "We'll teach him to be a sensible Toad." "I've heard that another new and expensive car will arrive at Toad Hall this morning," Badger said. "We must be off to Toad Hall to do something about it." "You're right," Rat said. "We must stop that unruly animal before he does any damage to himself or to anyone else." Badger led the way as they went to set Toad straight. When they arrived at Toad Hall, they found a shiny new car parked outside. It was bright red, Toad's favorite color. Toad opened the door and came out wearing goggles, a cap, and an overcoat. He was eager to show the car to his friends. "Hello, fellows!" yelled Toad happily. Then he noticed the stern look on the faces of his friends. Before he knew it, Toad's friends had grabbed him and were leading him back inside. "What is the meaning of this?" Toad demanded. "Take those ridiculous things off him," Badger said to Rat and Mole. Rat sat on Toad, while Mole took off the motor clothes bit by bit. He sat on him. Imagine that. Toad kicked and screamed the whole time, but finally, when the fancy motor clothes had been removed, Toad began to look embarrassed. Now that he was merely Toad again and not the terror of the highway, he seemed to understand his friend's intentions. "You've ignored all our warnings," Badger said. "You've squandered the money that your father left you on senseless things. We've let you make a fool of yourself for long enough." He led Toad into another room to talk. "Talking will never work," Rat said. After almost an hour of Badger's scolding and Toad's sobs, they emerged from the room. Toad frowned and looked very gloomy. "Have a seat, Toad," Badger said more kindly now. He turned to Rat and Mole. "I am happy to report that Toad has realized his mistakes. He has promised to give up cars forever." "That's very good news," Mole said. "Indeed," agreed Rat. As he said this, he was sure that he saw a mischievous twinkle in Toad's eye. Do you think Toad was lying? Do you think he'll give up cars forever? Somehow, I don't think so. "Toad, tell them what you told me," instructed Badger. "Say that you are sorry for what you have done." There was a long pause. "No!" Toad said suddenly. "I'm not sorry." "What?" cried Badger. "But you just said you were sorry." "I'd have said anything in there," Toad said. "You're so moving, dear Badger, but really, I am not sorry." "Then you don't promise to never drive a car again?" Badger asked. Certainly not, insisted Toad. I promise at the very first motor car I see, boop, boop, off I'll go. I told you so, didn't I? Rat asked Mole, who nodded in agreement. Well, since you won't listen to reason, Badger said, we'll have to try something else. You've often invited us to stay with you. Now we will. And we won't leave until you've seen the light in this situation. It's for your own good, Rat said kindly as they carried the struggling Toad up the stairs. We'll have such fun together. We'll take care of everything, Mole assured him. No more incidents with the police, Rat said. And no more hospital visits, added Mole cheerfully. They left Toad upstairs and met to discuss the best course of action. This is going to be hard work, Badger said, but we must see it through until Toad is well. Each animal took turns sleeping in Toad's room. Toad would arrange the chairs to look like a car and pretend to be driving. Eventually, this stopped, but he grew more depressed. One fine morning, Rat went upstairs to relieve Badger. Toad was still in bed. Badger warned Rat that he thought Toad was up to something. Toad was behaving too well. How are you doing, old chap? Rat asked. After a few minutes, Toad answered, Thanks for asking. But first, tell me how you are. And how are Badger and Mole? We're fine, Rat said. Mole and Badger are out and won't be back until lunchtime. Don't lie there moping on such a fine morning. Dear Ratty, moaned Toad, I am too depressed to get up this morning. I hope I won't be a burden to you for much longer. I hope not too, Rat said. I don't mind the trouble, but we are missing so much of this fine weather. I know I am a nuisance, Toad said. I'm glad to go through the trouble to make you sensible, Rat said. I would ask you to go fetch the doctor, Toad said, but I don't want you to go to the trouble. What do you need a doctor for? Rat asked. You must have noticed, Toad said. Oh, never mind. Forget that I asked. If you really need a doctor, I will go for one, Rat said. Maybe you can find a lawyer while you're at it, Toad said. I really should make out my will. Rat thought that Toad must be in very bad shape if he wanted a doctor and a lawyer. He rushed out the door, being careful to lock it behind him. He needed to make a quick decision, but there was nobody to consult. Finally, he hurried off to the village to do as Toad had asked. Toad watched Rat from his window. Then he got dressed quickly, laughing the whole time. He stuffed his pockets with money. Then he tied his sheets into a rope and lowered himself out of the window. He ran off in the opposite direction of Rat, whistling a merry tune. When the others returned, they were surprised to find Toad gone. Badger scolded Rat for falling for such a silly prank. But we're free, and we needn't waste any more time guarding Toad, he said. But we'd better stay here at Toad Hall for a while. There's no telling if Toad will be brought back at any moment, on a stretcher or by police officers. Meanwhile, Toad was very proud of himself for fooling his friends. Is that something we should be proud of? Being unkind to our friends? No, I don't think so. He walked briskly along the high road until he reached a town. He came to an inn called the Red Lion and decided to stop in and have a meal. He was almost done with his lunch when he heard the familiar sound of a car outside. The party that owned the car came into the inn. Toad quietly slipped out of the room, paid his bill, and went outside. He thought surely there would be no harm in merely looking at the car. As he stood in front of the car, he wondered to himself if the car would start easily. Before Toad knew it, he was in the driver's seat, had started the car, and was speeding along the high road without a care in the world. What did he just do? He stole someone else's car. Oh, no. He felt as though he were in a dream and did not once think about the consequences of his recklessness. The next thing Toad knew, he was in trouble and facing the judge to explain himself. "The case is quite clear," said the judge. "The scoundrel who was cowering before us has been found guilty of stealing a valuable motor car, endangering the public, and arguing with the police. Mr. Clerk, please tell me the harshest penalty we can impose." Oh my. The clerk replied, 1 year for theft, 3 years for reckless driving, and 15 years for arguing with the police. That's a total of 19 years. Let's round it off to an even 20. 20 years? My. Excellent, said the chairman. Prisoner, get yourself together. If you ever come back to us again, it will be a lot more serious than 20 years. They dragged the handcuffed Toad, protesting and struggling through the streets. The townspeople jeered and threw carrots at him. Toad hung his head in shame. Finally, they reached a dark dungeon. Then the jailer threw Toad into the dungeon and locked him in. Now Toad was a helpless prisoner in the dungeon of the best guarded castle in all of England. He hung his head in despair. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Poor Toad was indeed in a mess. But he got himself there, didn't he? "Oh, life is so unfair," he wailed. "I wish my friends were here." How is life unfair? He did do this to himself. That is not unfair. What about the people he stole the car from? But Toad's friends were nowhere in sight, and he was a captive. There was nothing for him to do but wait, and Toad was not good at waiting. Well, that's the end of our chapter. I hope you're liking this story. Toad has got himself in quite a pickle, hasn't he? And that's what happens when we make bad choices. We get into trouble. It's nobody's fault but ours. But we like to try to blame other people, don't we? But it's only our own fault when we get into trouble. When we lose friends, even. It's our own actions, usually, that are the cause. Let's think about what we do before we do it, right? I think that's the best. Be sure to hit the like button, okay? And subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're notified every time there's a new video. And be sure to share with all your friends. Bye-bye for now.